So this is precisely where Freud wanted to get to with the idea of bringing in how the pleasure principle and the reality principle collide, right? That this religious feeling, the religious attitude, is more like a safety zone and a psychological desire than an actual grounds that we can prove. And if you are religious, you might think that he is wrong, but we also have no way of proving that there is a religious ground that we ought to be exploring, right? So Freud is trying to come at this explanation from the most science oriented perspective. And yeah, a science that he created his own. I understand that problem, but this is what's going to motivate his critique of the religious feeling. That this critique actually talks about our need for a metaphysical ground that we can never fully substantiate. If we ask a religious person why they believe, the best evidence that they will give us is that they have faith, right? But faith in what? For Freud, that would be throwing the argument all the way back to a certain kind of struggle between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. There are things that I want to do, but I shouldn't do them. Therefore, I'm just going to create this mega narrative, this meta narrative that tells me that I ought not to do them and that I ought to behave in this way, right? So Freud is criticizing this residue of past experience that we have never analyzed and how we have decided to formulate all these ideas on a principle that maybe we're not sure we can substantiate, right? He's also criticizing whether or not the metaphysical realm truly exists or is it just a coping mechanism, right? And if he's right that this is just a coping mechanism, then Hegel's phenomenology of the spirit is predicated on really strange grounds. These formation of self-consciousness from a general consciousness doesn't doesn't seem to hold anymore. This idea that I am formed, however, by my needs and desires and how I need to cope between those and the sense of duty, responsibility, and obligations that society bestows upon me, that seems to be a more material basis on which we can talk about how we ought to behave, right? So this is what brings him to talking about guilt in chapter 8. When we think about what we are supposed to do and what we can do, we either talk about anxiety, regret, or guilt. I want to give my mom a nice present for Mother's Day, and I know that regardless of what I get her, and regardless of what she says, I'm going to have this feeling that I didn't give her something that was good enough, right? I don't even have to hear it from somebody else. I have internalized this kind of guilt. I was also raised Catholic, so they did a really good job on me. But there's this guilt that has been somehow internalized, and I'm always looking for this voice of criticism, of telling me where it is that I want to go, what it is that I want to do, right? So this is a part that Freud gets to that makes me really sad to not have you guys in class. But is there an unconscious sense of fear, of guilt? Is this anxiety always present in the way in which civilization has made us be its citizens, right? Because we have talked in the social contract theories about how each one of these theories thinks, regardless of how our human nature works, they think that there are things that we shouldn't do once we are in society. But that doesn't mean that we don't have them. That doesn't mean that we are not the violent individuals that Hobbes said we were. It just means that we're not acting according to those traits, that somehow we regulate ourselves. The Locke, um, the Lockean idea of using rationality in this even stringent way, right? It's also a source for Freud, it's also a source of anxiety. And if I know that I'm supposed to behave in a rational way, even if people don't tell me that I am supposed to behave in a rational way, whenever I don't behave in a rational way, I'll feel anxious or guilty or depressed, or I will feel that somehow I failed. And Freud thinks that this is what society needs us to experience in order to be part of the way in which civilization has advanced, right? So we talk about this idea that guilt has been propagated by different structures in our society. And for Freud, there's no better example than religion. And yes, masters of suspicion are really critical of the role religion has played in our society. So Freud thinks that we talk about conscience in this way that it is not an inner voice. It's the superego, it's the cultural superego, right? So he has this quote: the superego is an agency which has been inferred by us, and conscience is a function we ascribe, among other functions, to that agency. So when I think about my conscience telling me that I am not supposed to do X, Y, or Z, for Freud, what I'm really thinking about is that I have been told that I shouldn't behave in these ways, and now I have internalized it, right? Because my parents raised me that way, because my society raised me that way, but also because there are political, social, cultural organizations in my society that are expecting and that have created a set of expectations in me. So this conscience keeps a watch over my actions. These institutions, like my parents, don't have to be in front of me. The church doesn't have to be in front of me. Liberal society doesn't have to be in front of me for me to judge myself and to censor myself, for me to feel that I have either done what they wanted me to do or I have failed to do what they wanted me to do. And for Freud, that's the thing that keeps us in check. So it's this fear that we don't want to be punished, we don't want to be underachievers. We want to perform as we have been told to perform. But the problem might be that those expectations that have been given to us, they might be unrealistic. And Freud doesn't talk that much about that here. He does it in some other essays, but definitely people who are working with a Freudian frame of mind have said as much. And interestingly enough, that's one of the things that Nietzsche criticizes in the project of modernity and the project of civilization, that we have become this executor of the punishment of which Locke mentioned. We don't need, most of us anyway, don't need that external viewer to let us know that we didn't do our job, right? So for Freud, because it's not only an external voice that is telling me about guilt or that I feel remorse, it's a fear that has turned inside. He talks about the superego as being omniscient. I am always being checked by these ideas that let me know if I have behaved in the right way or if I haven't, right? In order to be part of society, I want to behave in that way. And I want to be part of society. That's the problem, that I want to belong to society. Therefore, I will censor myself. I will pigeonhole myself so that I can suppress who I truly am and appear in society as a decent and respectable human being. For Freud, we struggle so much to achieve this level of belonging to a society that we have no idea of all the stress that we put in our ego. So, in this way, he makes me think of, we might have this aggressivity of which Hobbes talked, but it's society that won't let us express it, right? And we're talking about not like, we're talking about repression. We're talking about not being able to express that sense of violence and selfishness that Hobbes talked about, that we have to masquerade it as something else, that we have to do all these things so we can compensate those moments of weakness, quote unquote, when I feel that I have acted in a selfish way, right? So even if Hobbes is right, Freud would say that society has done its job making me my own enemy, giving me this sense of guilt, giving me these tools so that I can suppress all those things that I feel, right? If I want to, here's where I would love for you guys to elaborate. Like, what are instances where you feel that you have turned against yourself? When I love this quote, the development of the individual seems to us to be a product of the interaction between two urges: the urge towards happiness, which we usually call egoistic, and the urge towards union with others in the community, which we call altruistic. So these two are also reflective of the pleasure principle and the reality principle. Am I supposed to do things for myself, or am I supposed to do things for others? And can I enjoy the things that I do for others, or is that making me selfish too? But can I only live for others? What if I don't pay any attention to myself? So for Freud, civilization has put all this stress in our decision making process, in trying to make us a better kind of person. It has generated this kind of virulent reality in which the concepts of the superego are always present and we can't ever escape them. Even when we reject something from society, even when we say, I would never do X, we always catch ourselves a second later, a year later, doing that thing we criticized in society. So, this is why we thought we wanted ethics so that we could guide people into becoming better. But Freud says that what we have actually done is that we have guided people into how to become more neurotic, how to be more anxious about their existence and the way in which they work. If you have a problem and you tell someone about it, are you telling it because you need attention, or are you telling this person because you truly think that's a problem and they can help in some way, right? So here's the crossroads where Freud thinks this whole idea of a social contract and living in society led us. We follow principles that maybe are not even making the individual happy, that they might be creating more of a psychotic, schizophrenic citizen in society that just represses whatever they can't express in society. Civilization and its discontents ends in a remarkably strange note. Freud says men have gained control over the forces of nature to such an extent that with their help they would have no difficulty in exterminating one another to the last man. if this oceanic feeling exists, if we are equal at a metaphysical level, I think Freud would want to know what happened that we keep exterminating one another. Done.